72 million years ago, a number that deserves a moment of quiet consideration. The interior of the North American continent lay beneath a warm, shallow sea. Not the edge of a continent, the interior. Where Kansas is today, where Colorado rises, where the Dakotas spread their grasslands, there was water. Geologists call it the Western Interior Seaway, and it was one of the great geographic facts of the Late Cretaceous period. A body of water stretching from what is now the Arctic Ocean down to the Gulf of Mexico, dividing the continent in two, 300 kilometers wide in places, never deeper than a few hundred meters. Warm as bath water along its southern margins, gleaming with a light that no human eye has ever seen. This was not ancient history in the sense we usually mean. 72 million years ago, the dinosaurs were still here. The last of the great sauropods still walked the lowland forests bordering that inland sea. Tyrannosaurs patrolled the shorelines. Pterosaurs with wingspans wider than a hang glider crossed the sky above the water's edge. The world was familiar enough in its broad strokes: land, sea, sky, and yet completely alien in every particular. The continents were not where they are today. The poles were warm. The atmosphere held more carbon dioxide than it does now. The planet was, in many ways, running hotter and stranger than anything we have experienced in the span of human memory. And in that seaway, and in the shallow tropical oceans that covered much of what is now Europe, and in the warm coastal waters of every continent on Earth, something extraordinary was happening. The oceans were being claimed. Not by sharks. Sharks were there. They have always been there, patient and ancient, conserving their design across hundreds of millions of years. Not by the great marine reptiles of earlier epochs, the long-necked plesiosaurs and the barrel-bodied ichthyosaurs, though some of these still survived. The oceans of the late Cretaceous were being claimed by something new. Something that had walked out of those same oceans tens of millions of years earlier, had spent its time on land, had evolved legs and lungs and the ability to cross dry ground, and then had turned around, gone back to the water, and built something entirely different. The mosasaurs, marine lizards, oceanic predators descended from terrestrial ancestors, creatures that carry within their very bones the signature of a double life, land-adapted features repurposed for the sea, evidence of an evolutionary journey that took tens of millions of years and produced, at its peak, animals that dominated every level of the marine food web on a global scale. This is their story. It is also the story of the ocean that formed them, the world that ended them, and the extraordinary evolutionary logic that made them possible in the first place. It is a story 66 million years in the closing. And it begins, as most great stories do, before the beginning. Before we go further, if you're finding this worth your time, I hope you'll consider subscribing and liking the video if the impulse strikes. I make these for people who genuinely want to spend time in ancient worlds, and knowing you're out there makes every hour of research worth it. If you want, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. These stories travel further than I ever expect, and it always means something to know the distance. Now, back to the Cretaceous, back to the sea. The mosasaurs did not appear from nowhere,
No creature does. They emerged from a lineage with deep roots in the terrestrial world. The varanoids, the group of lizards that today includes the monitor lizards, the Komodo dragon, and a scattering of smaller, less dramatic forms. The varanoids had been diversifying since at least the early Cretaceous, exploring different ecological niches on land, developing the long, forked tongue, the alert predatory intelligence, the flexible skull with loosely articulated jawbones that would prove so useful later for swallowing large prey. They were, by any measure, successful animals. But the sea was there. It had always been there, and in the mid-Cretaceous, probably sometime between 100 and 90 million years ago. The exact timing is still being refined, and we should be honest about that uncertainty. Something in the varanoid lineage made the transition. Perhaps it began at the water's edge. Perhaps a population of varanoid lizards was hunting fish in shallow coastal pools, growing bolder with each generation, spending more time in the water, developing subtly flattened tails to aid in swimming, losing some of the leg length useful on land, but less useful in a medium that requires a different kind of propulsion entirely. We do not have fossils from this exact moment. We may never have them. The fossil record preserves bones with wonderful regularity, but moments of transition with maddening rarity. It is in the nature of evolution that the most interesting things happen in populations that are relatively small, in places that are not always favourable to preservation, over timescales that feel significant to an organism, but are brief enough to leave few traces. What we have is the before, terrestrial varanoids, and the after, the first unmistakable mosasaurs. And between them, a gap of inference and probability that scientists have been working to narrow for over 200 years. What we can say with confidence is that by about 98 million years ago, true mosasaurs were present in the world's oceans. Small, perhaps a meter or two in length, probably still capable of coming ashore, still retaining a body plan recognizably lizard-like in its basic proportions, but already committed to the sea in the ways that mattered. Already swimming, already hunting, already beginning the transformation that would, over the next 32 million years, produce some of the largest and most formidable predators that have ever lived in the oceans of this planet. To understand what made the mosasaurs extraordinary, it helps to understand what they started from and what they became. Begin with the skull. In most lizards, the skull is a fairly rigid structure, well suited to capturing and holding prey of manageable size. But varanoids had already evolved a key modification, a loosely jointed skull with extra points of flexibility that allowed the mouth to accommodate larger prey. The mosasaurs inherited this and elaborated on it. Their skulls developed what paleontologists call kinesis, a genuine mobility at multiple points in the skull that allowed the jaws to flex, splay outward, and engulf objects much larger than a rigid skull would permit. The lower jaw had an additional joint midway along its length, a feature shared today only by snakes, which are themselves thought to be closely related to the varanoid lineage. This extra joint meant that the lower jaw could hinge not just at the back, but also in the middle, allowing the mouth to open wider still. A mosasaur feeding was not simply biting. It was deploying a flexible, mobile prey capture apparatus refined over tens of millions of years. The teeth varied enormously between different lineages, and this variation tells us a great deal about how thoroughly the mosasaurs had partitioned the available ecological space. Some mosasaurs had sharp, recurved teeth, the classic predator design, good for seizing and holding slippery fish and preventing them from writhing free. Others had teeth that were blunted and rounded, clearly adapted for crushing hard-shelled prey. Ammonites, sea turtles, the heavily armoured invertebrates of the Cretaceous sea floor. At least one lineage, the genus Globidens, had teeth so spherical they resembled ball bearings. Extraordinary specialized tools for crushing the toughest shells that the ocean could produce. And at the largest end of the size spectrum, animals like Mosasaurus itself had massive conical teeth set in powerful jaws capable of exerting tremendous bite force, suited to attacking large, robust prey, including, quite plausibly, other mosasaurs. The body plan underwent its own transformation. The front limbs became paddle-like flippers, the humerus shortened and broadened, the individual finger bones multiplied, a process called hyperphalangy, literally extra fingers, to create the long, flexible, fin-like paddles that made maneuvering in three-dimensional space so much more effective. The rear limbs were retained in early forms and used for swimming, but gradually reduced in later lineages, becoming vestigial, the smallest hint of the terrestrial ancestry these animals were leaving further and further behind with each passing million years. The tail is perhaps the most revealing part of the story. Early mosasaurs had tails that were probably somewhat flattened laterally, useful for swimming, but not dramatically so. Over time, the tails evolved to become more and more propulsive. In 2010, the discovery of exceptionally preserved specimens revealed something that had been debated for decades. The tails of at least some advanced mosasaurs were hypocercal. The vertebral column bent downward into the lower lobe of a tail fin, producing a crescent-shaped tail almost identical in its hydrodynamic principles to the tail fins of sharks and fast-swimming bony fish. This was not something scientists had expected. Conventional reconstructions showed mosasaurs as elongated, roughly cylindrical swimmers, moving like giant eels or sea snakes. The new evidence suggested something quite different. Animals capable of sustained, powerful, efficient swimming. Animals that did not merely undulate through the water, but actively drove themselves forward with a high aspect ratio tail fin built for speed. There is something humbling about this discovery. For nearly 2 centuries, scientists had been reconstructing these animals based on careful analysis of their bones, and the picture was reasonably accurate in most respects. But the tail, the very engine of the animal, had been missed. It took preservation of unusual quality, including traces of soft tissue mineralized in exceptional conditions, to reveal the truth. It is worth sitting with this. The most intensively studied marine predators of the Cretaceous were swimming through our mental reconstructions with the wrong tail for 200 years. What else are we missing? The uncertainty is not a failure of science. It is the thing that makes science interesting. We know they breathed air. Like all reptiles, mosasaurs retained the lung-based respiratory system of their terrestrial ancestors. They could not extract oxygen from water the way fish can. They had to surface, to inhale, to hold their breath for whatever duration their physiology allowed, then dive again. We do not know exactly how long they could hold their breath. This is one of the many things the fossil record cannot tell us directly. Modern marine reptiles like sea turtles can hold their breath for several hours in resting conditions, though much less when actively swimming and hunting. Large mosasaurs, with their greater body mass and presumably efficient circulatory systems adapted to diving, may have managed extended submergences. But every few minutes, or every few tens of minutes, they would have risen to the surface.
In the middle of the Cretaceous seaway,
In open water, there would have been a moment of surfacing, a vast animal breaking the surface tension of that ancient sea, drawing breath, exhaling, and diving again. We know they were warm water animals, broadly speaking, though some species ranged into cooler waters. The chemistry of their teeth, specifically the ratios of oxygen isotopes preserved in the enamel, tells us about the temperature of the water they lived in. And for most species, it points to warm, shallow coastal seas rather than cold, deep ocean water. This is consistent with the global paleogeography of the Late Cretaceous, which was, by modern standards, a genuinely tropical world. Even at latitudes that would today be temperate, the Cretaceous ocean was warm. There were no permanent polar ice caps. The thermal gradient from equator to pole was gentler. The world was a hothouse, and the mosasaurs thrived in it. We do not know what colour they were. We know they were reptiles, and living reptiles span an extraordinary range of coloration, from the bright greens and blues of chameleons to the dull browns and greys of many monitor lizards, to the vivid yellows and oranges of sun skinks. Some fossil specimens preserve traces of skin, and these traces tell us about scale shape and texture, but not pigmentation. There is some evidence from melanosomes, tiny structures that contained the pigment melanin, preserved in exceptional fossils of other Cretaceous marine reptiles, suggesting dark dorsal coloration, which would make sense for a large aquatic predator in terms of thermoregulation and countershading camouflage. But we should be honest. When we imagine the colour of a mosasaur, we are extrapolating. We are making an educated guess. The actual appearance of these animals, swimming through the sunlit shallows of that ancient sea, belongs to a category of knowledge we may never fully recover. To understand the mosasaurs, we must understand the world they inhabited. A world that was, in geological terms, aggressively aquatic. The Late Cretaceous was a time of extraordinarily high sea levels, the highest of the past 250 million years by some estimates. The continents were lower, the ocean floors were wider and younger, and therefore higher in elevation, and vast quantities of the water that today sits frozen at the poles was then liquid, distributed through a global ocean that covered a larger fraction of the Earth's surface than at any time in recent geological history. What this meant in practice was a world of shallow seas. Not just the western interior seaway of North America, dramatic though that was, but shallow epicontinental seas covering large portions of what is now Europe, parts of Asia, much of the southern continents. The Tethys Sea, that ancient equatorial ocean that preceded the modern Mediterranean, was wide and warm and bathed in sunlight through its entire depth in many places. The warm, sunlit, shallow sea is an extraordinarily productive environment. Sunlight penetrates to the bottom, fueling photosynthesis throughout the water column. Nutrients cycle efficiently in the comparatively limited depth. Invertebrates of staggering diversity colonize every available surface. Fish schools move through the lit water in densities that may seem impossible by modern standards, but are consistent with what we know about pre-industrial ocean productivity. This was a world of biological abundance. And into this abundance, the mosasaurs had arrived. By the time we reached the Late Cretaceous, roughly 80 to 66 million years ago, the mosasaurs had diversified into an extraordinary array of forms, exploiting virtually every ecological niche that the shallow, warm seas of the Cretaceous world could offer. There were small, agile forms, a meter or two in length, probably similar in ecological role to modern dolphins. Fast, maneuverable, hunting, schooling fish with their sharp, pointed teeth. There were medium-sized generalists that probably took a wide variety of prey, opportunistic and adaptable in the way that successful mid-tier predators often are. And there were giants. The giants deserve particular attention because they represent something that has not been seen in the ocean since. Not, at least, in the same form. Tylosaurus, known from spectacular specimens found in the chalk deposits of Kansas, could reach 10 or 11 meters in length, possibly more. Its skull alone was more than a meter long in large adults, a massive elongated structure lined with powerful teeth, built not for the gentle manipulation of small prey, but for the outright seizure and killing of large animals.
Prognathodon, another large genus,
Had a massively reinforced skull and blunt, crushing teeth in the back of its jaws, suggesting it could tackle armored prey that smaller mosasaurs could not. Haenosaurus, from the chalk seas of Europe, may have rivaled Tylosaurus in length. And Mosasaurus itself, the genus that gives the family its name, found in the chalk deposits of Maastricht in the Netherlands in the late 18th century, perhaps the largest of all, with specimens suggesting lengths that approach or even exceed 14 meters. 14 meters. To put that in perspective, a mature male great white shark today reaches perhaps 6 meters. The largest mosasaurs were more than twice the length of the largest sharks in the modern ocean. They were longer than a city bus. Their heads were large enough to swallow a human whole, though no human existed to be swallowed. They moved through that ancient sea as the unambiguous top predators of a global ecosystem, not because nothing competed with them, but because nothing in the open water of the late Cretaceous ocean could reliably outrun them, outmaneuver them at scale, or survive being caught by them. Yet the picture of mosasaurs as solitary superpredators dominating empty oceans is probably wrong. The late Cretaceous sea was crowded. It was full of animals that occupied every possible position in the food web, and the mosasaur's position at the top was not an uncontested throne, but an active ecological role requiring constant performance. What were they competing with? The sharks. Always the sharks. The late Cretaceous had sharks in extraordinary diversity and abundance, including some that were themselves substantial in size. Cretoxyrhina, the Ginsu shark, reached perhaps 7 meters and had teeth so well designed for cutting through bone and flesh that specimens have been found with direct evidence of attacks on mosasaurs, bite marks in mosasaur vertebrae, mosasaur bones found in shark stomach regions, the physical record of actual predatory encounters preserved in stone. The relationship between Cretoxorhina and the mosasaurs was likely one of mutual danger. A large mosasaur could probably kill or drive off a Cretoxorhina in open conflict, but a small or juvenile mosasaur, or a large one caught at a disadvantage, was potentially vulnerable. The ocean was not a simple hierarchy. It was a complex, shifting web of competing interests. There were also the last of the plesiosaurs.
These extraordinary animals, four-paddled, long-necked in some lineages and short-necked and large-skulled in others, had been in the oceans since the Triassic, more than 100 million years before the mosasaurs, and they persisted into the late Cretaceous with considerable diversity. The elasmosaurids had necks of extraordinary length. One species, Elasmosaurus, had 72 neck vertebrae, more than half of all the vertebrae in its body, and probably hunted fish by swinging their heads rapidly through schools of prey, too slow in terms of overall body speed to chase fast fish, but capable of rapid neck strikes that could intercept them. The polycotylids were more compact, with shorter necks and larger heads, probably more versatile hunters. The pliosaurs, short-necked, large-headed, powerful, had been the dominant large predators of earlier Mesozoic seas, but by the late Cretaceous they were in decline, their diversity reduced, their ecological role at the very top of the food web challenged and perhaps supplanted by the mosasaurs. There were also sea turtles of remarkable diversity, not simply the Cretaceous antecedents of our modern loggerheads and leatherbacks, but a genuinely diverse assemblage of forms, some of enormous size. Archelon, found in the same Kansas chalk deposits as Tylosaurus, reached nearly 5 meters in length, making it the largest turtle known from the fossil record. It was almost certainly prey for the largest mosasaurs, and fossils of Archelon have been found with large bite marks consistent with mosasaur attack.
The chalk of Kansas, laid down in the western interior seaway between roughly 87 and 82 million years ago, is one of the most extraordinary windows into the late Cretaceous ocean. A geological formation that has yielded hundreds of complete or near-complete skeletons of mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, sharks, turtles, and the enormous seabirds and pterosaurs that flew above the water's surface. To stand on the grasslands of western Kansas and know that beneath your feet lies this accumulated record of an ancient seafloor is one of the stranger experiences that geological literacy can produce.
The shallow coastal seas where most mosasaur fossils are found give us one picture of their world. Well-lit, productive, warm, populated with an astonishing diversity of life. But the Cretaceous ocean was not only shallow. Where the continental shells dropped away, where the water deepened beyond the reach of sunlight, there was another world entirely. We know less about this world than we know about the shallow seas, for the simple reason that deep ocean sediments of late Cretaceous age are difficult to access. The oceanic crust is young relative to the continents. It is constantly being created at mid-ocean ridges and consumed at subduction zones, so very little of it is old enough to preserve late Cretaceous material at the surface. What we know of the deep Cretaceous ocean comes largely from indirect evidence, from the chemistry of rocks, from the study of deep-sea sediments that were deposited on crust now subducted, but preserved as slivers caught between colliding plates, and from what we can infer by analogy with the modern deep ocean. The deep Cretaceous ocean was warm by modern standards. The bottom water temperature of the Cretaceous deep ocean was probably around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, compared to the near freezing temperatures of modern abyssal water. This difference matters enormously for biology. Cold water holds more oxygen, and the extremely cold deep waters of the modern ocean create a well-oxygenated environment that supports diverse life, including the deep scavenger communities that consume material falling from above. The warmer deep waters of the Cretaceous may have been more stratified, with a warm surface layer above and potentially poorly oxygenated deeper water below. Conditions that would have concentrated life in the upper ocean and created a stark boundary between the lit, productive, oxygen-rich surface waters and the darker, warmer, potentially oxygen-poor depths below. This stratification would have shaped the behavior of large predators like mosasaurs. As air-breathing animals, they were ultimately constrained to the surface. They needed to return to air regularly, and they could not follow prey into depths beyond the physiological limits of a breath-hold dive. But within those limits, which for large mosasaurs may have extended to several hundred meters, they had access to prey that lived below the reach of light.
The twilight zone, the ocean layer between roughly 200 and 1,000 meters where sunlight fades to nothing, was populated in the Cretaceous, as it is today, by a diverse community of fish, squid-like animals, and invertebrates that performed daily vertical migrations, rising toward the surface at night and descending by day. A mosasaur hunting at depth, diving into the dimming water column to intercept these vertical migrants, was operating in a world of near total darkness, navigating by whatever sensory systems evolution had provided. What sensory systems did they have? Here again, we are working from inference and analogy. The eyes of mosasaurs were large relative to the skull, consistent with an animal that needed good vision in low-light conditions, the same pattern we see in modern deep-diving marine mammals. The structure of the eye, preserved in rare exceptional fossils, shows a sclerotic ring, a ring of small bones inside the eye that supports its shape, of a design associated with large aperture and good light-gathering ability. This is exactly what we would expect in an animal that needed to see in the dimly lit water column. Some mosasaurs may also have possessed a degree of electroreception or pressure wave sensitivity. The lateral line system, the network of sensory cells that allows fish to detect vibrations and pressure changes in the water, is a feature of aquatic vertebrates generally, and while we cannot know for certain that mosasaurs retained or re-evolved such a system, the logic of hunting in dark water argues for it. Finding prey in darkness requires either acute chemical senses, acute pressure wave detection, or both. The forked tongue of varanoid lizards is, after all, an olfactory organ, drawing scent molecules from the environment and delivering them to sensory receptors in the roof of the mouth. In water, this tongue-based chemoreception would have worked differently than in air, but it may still have provided useful information about the chemical signatures of prey or the approach of predators. We are here at the frontier of what we can say with confidence. The sensory world of a mosasaur is something we can reason about but never directly observe. What we can say is that the deep ocean of the Cretaceous was not empty or featureless from the mosasaur's perspective.
It was a complex, three-dimensional environment rich with information that a highly evolved predator could learn to read. These were not simple animals. Their brains, judged by skull cavity morphology, were more developed than those of crocodilians and comparable in relative size to some modern lizards.
They were, by reptilian standards, cognitively sophisticated predators, and there is every reason to think they used that sophistication in their hunting. The Cretaceous ocean at depth was also home to creatures that had no modern analogues, or rather, whose modern successors are so reduced in size and abundance as to seem pale echoes of their Cretaceous incarnations. The ammonites were perhaps the most extraordinary of these. Ammonites, coiled cephalopods related to modern nautiluses and squid, had been in the oceans since the Devonian, some 400 million years, diversifying and contracting through extinction events, always recovering, always filling the available ecological space. In the late Cretaceous, they were at the height of a final flourishing, with hundreds of species occupying different niches in the water column. Some were small and fast, probably swimming actively in open water. Others were enormous. The largest known ammonite, Parapuzosia sepenredensis, had a shell diameter of nearly 2 meters, making it the largest cephalopod by shell size ever discovered. Others were bizarre in form, heteromorph ammonites that had partially or completely uncoiled their shells, growing in spiral towers or loose open curves that seemed to defy the elegant logic of the classic coiled design. These heteromorphs are one of the stranger sights of the Cretaceous ocean. A paperclip-shaped or hairpin-curved or loosely wound shell, a meter or more in length, drifting through the water column, trailing soft tentacles, feeding on whatever microscopic life it could capture. The ammonites were important prey for many mosasaur lineages. The crushing teeth of genera like globidans and the heavily reinforced jaws of prognathodon were very likely adaptations to exploiting ammonites and other hard-shelled cephalopods. There is direct fossil evidence. Ammonite shells with bite marks that match mosasaur tooth spacing. Ammonite fragments found in association with mosasaur stomach regions. The relationship between the mosasaurs and the ammonites was, in a sense, one of the defining ecological relationships of the late Cretaceous ocean. A long-running evolutionary arms race between the predator's tooth designs and the shell thickness and shell shape of their prey. Mosasaurs were not merely swimming machines. They were animals with life histories: birth, growth, competition, reproduction, death. And the fossil record has, over time, yielded fragments of information about each stage. Reproduction is one of the more remarkable chapters. For a long time, paleontologists assumed that mosasaurs, like most reptiles, laid eggs. This was the conservative assumption, the default for a large reptile with no particular evidence one way or the other. Then, in 2020, a paper in Nature described a remarkable fossil from the late Cretaceous of Antarctica. A thin, soft-shelled egg, roughly 28 centimeters across, the largest known fossil egg from a non-avian animal and one of the largest eggs ever documented. The egg was found in marine sediments, consistent with a marine animal. Its soft shell structure was unlike the hard shells of crocodilian or dinosaur eggs, and its size and context suggested strongly, though not conclusively, a mosasaur origin. If correct, and the evidence is suggestive rather than definitive, it would mean that mosasaurs gave birth not by coming ashore to lay hard-shelled eggs as sea turtles do, but by laying soft-shelled eggs that floated or sank to the bottom in shallow water, or perhaps by bearing live young directly, the eggs hatching internally before birth, a strategy used by many modern lizards and by at least one well-documented group of marine reptiles from the earlier Mesozoic. There is also direct evidence from specimens found in Kansas and elsewhere of small mosasaurs preserved inside or in close association with larger ones, material interpreted by some researchers as evidence of live birth, the small individuals representing fetuses or neonates. The interpretation is not universally accepted, and the preservation of such specimens creates genuine ambiguity about what is inside versus what is merely associated by preservation. But the accumulation of evidence suggests strongly that at least some mosasaurs were viviparous, bearing live young in the water, much as dolphins and whales do today. This matters for how we think about their ecology. An animal that gives birth to live young in open water does not have to return to land. Its reproductive cycle is entirely marine. It can be fully pelagic, an animal of the open ocean, in a way that an animal constrained to come ashore for egg-laying cannot be. If mosasaurs were truly viviparous, they had completed the transition from land to sea in the most fundamental biological sense. Every stage of their life cycle could take place in salt water. They were, in that sense, as thoroughly marine as the whales that would eventually claim the same evolutionary story tens of millions of years later. Growth rates are another area of active research. Bone histology, the study of microscopic growth patterns in bone cross-sections, has been applied to mosasaur material, and the results suggest that large mosasaurs grew relatively rapidly by reptilian standards, laying down bone quickly in ways more reminiscent of warm-blooded endotherms than of the slow-growing ectotherms we might expect from their lizard heritage. This does not necessarily mean they were fully warm-blooded in the way mammals and birds are. It may mean they were able to maintain elevated body temperatures through sheer body mass, the mechanism called gigantothermy, by which very large animals retain heat simply because they are too big to cool down quickly. A 14-meter mosasaur in warm, shallow water, generating heat through the metabolic activity of its enormous muscle mass, would cool slowly even without any active thermoregulation. It would be, in practical terms, warmer and more energetically active than a small lizard in the same environment. The isotopic evidence from teeth is consistent with this picture. Oxygen isotope ratios in large mosasaur teeth suggest body temperatures considerably above ambient water temperature, warmer than the surrounding sea, warmer than ectothermy alone would predict. The mosasaurs were, in all likelihood, functional homeotherms, or near homeotherms, in the sense that mattered ecologically. Their body temperature was relatively stable, their metabolic rate was elevated, their capacity for sustained activity was high. They were not sluggish, cold-blooded reptiles waiting for the sun to warm them.
They were warm, active, and probably capable of sustained high-speed swimming in a way that fundamentally separates them from the cold water constraints of their terrestrial cousins. How long did they live? We cannot say with certainty. The largest individuals, based on growth ring counts in bone cross-sections where these are interpretable, appear to have been quite old, potentially decades old. though the interpretation of growth records in mosasaur bone is complicated and the estimates range widely. The pattern, insofar as we can read it, suggests animals that grew rapidly to large size, then continued growing more slowly throughout life, reaching their maximum dimensions over many years of sustained survival. Very large mosasaurs were almost certainly very old mosasaurs. They had outlasted enormous numbers of predation attempts, food shortages, disease, and the constant attrition of an ocean that was genuinely dangerous at every level. What did it mean to be a young mosasaur?
Almost everything that might have killed an adult was more dangerous to a juvenile. Even in shallow coastal waters rich with food, a small mosasaur would have been prey for large sharks, large fish, and conceivably for larger mosasaurs of other species. There are specimens of small mosasaurs with shark bite marks. There are specimens with apparent injuries consistent with attacks by other large predators. The young lived in a world that wanted to eat them, and the ones that survived long enough to reach significant body size had done something that most of their siblings and cousins had not. They had been quick enough, alert enough, or simply lucky enough to persist. The mosasaur family was not a single creature in many sizes. It was an evolutionary radiation, a branching, diversifying lineage that spread into different ecological niches with impressive speed and thoroughness, producing by the Late Cretaceous a cast of characters as varied and ecologically distinct as, say, the modern family of great cats or the dolphin family today. Allow me to introduce some of them. Tylosaurus, perhaps the most evocative of the mosasaurs, certainly the one best known from complete specimens in North American collections. A large tylosaurine could reach 10 meters or more, streamlined, powerful, with an elongated skull that projected forward into a blunt, rounded rostrum at its tip. This rostrum was robust, heavily built, and bears evidence of having been used as a weapon. Specimens of Tylosaurus have been found with healed injuries, and the anatomy of the rostrum is consistent with ramming behavior, a tactic used by modern sperm whales and some sharks to stun or injure prey before seizing it. Tylosaurus was a pursuit predator. Its streamlined body and powerful tail made it capable of sustained speed, and its overall build suggests an animal that ran down its prey in open water rather than ambushing it from cover. Its known prey, based on stomach contents and associated fossils, included fish, diving birds, other mosasaurs, and a plesiosaur. Evidence that even the largest marine reptiles of the period were not safe from the largest Tylosaurus individuals. Platycarpus. Smaller and more gracile than Tylosaurus, with a deeper body form, longer paddles, and evidence from exceptional fossils of a more strongly bilobed tail, with the dorsal lobe of the fin extending above the vertebral column. Platycarpus is one of the mosasaurs known from preserved soft tissue outlines showing the extent of the body and the tail fin shape, and these specimens have been important in refining our picture of mosasaur locomotion. Based on its body form, Platycarpus was probably a more maneuverable swimmer than Tylosaurus, capable of tighter turns, more agile in three-dimensional space, perhaps more suited to hunting in complex environments like reef edges or kelp-like vegetation than in open water. It had moderately pointed teeth, good for fish, and its eye sockets suggest large eyes consistent with hunting in dim conditions. Prognathodon.
one of the more massively built of the late mosasaurs, with an enormous skull reinforced with thick bones and equipped in the rear of the jaws with rounded, blunt teeth, clearly designed for crushing hard prey. The name means forward jaw tooth, referring to the strongly procumbent anterior teeth, which projected somewhat forward, useful for gripping prey while the rear teeth crushed it. Prognathodon was built like an aquatic bulldog, not particularly streamlined, not built for speed, but built for power. Its likely prey included large turtles, large ammonites, and possibly other hard-shelled invertebrates. It occupied a niche that few other top predators were equipped to exploit, and it occupied it thoroughly. Specimens of Prognathodon are known from multiple continents: Europe, North America, Africa, the Middle East, consistent with a widespread, globally distributed species that was successful across the broad range of warm Cretaceous seas. Mosasaurus. The animal that lent its name to the entire group, discovered in a limestone quarry near the town of Maastricht in the Netherlands in 1764, though its true nature was not understood for decades. The first significant specimen was found below a private estate, leading to a dispute about ownership that was ultimately resolved in one of the stranger footnotes of natural history, when French revolutionary forces captured Maastricht in 1795 and specifically confiscated the fossil, which they considered a prize of scientific conquest. The specimen eventually made its way to Paris, where it became one of the founding exhibits of a new science of what we now call paleontology. For the next 200 years, Mosasaurus would be the name around which the field of Mesozoic marine reptile research organized itself. Mosasaurus was large. Estimates for the largest individuals range from 10 to 14 meters, depending on interpretation of available material. It had a massive skull, robust conical teeth suited to seizing and killing large prey, and a body form suggesting a powerful, capable, open ocean predator. It is one of the last mosasaurs in the fossil record. Specimens of Mosasaurus are known from sediments laid down in the final few 100,000 years before the end Cretaceous extinction event, meaning it was among the survivors closest to the final catastrophe. Haenosaurus and Liodon, both from the chalk seas of Europe, were additional giants, their material tangled with that of Mosasaurus in the complex taxonomic history of 19th century European paleontology. The European chalk seas, shallow, warm, clear, covering much of what is now England, France, Belgium, Denmark and southern Sweden, were extraordinarily rich in mosasaur material, preserved in the same chalky calcium carbonate sediments that now form the white cliffs of the English Channel.
If you have stood on those white cliffs and looked out over the channel, you have stood on the floor of an ancient mosasaur sea. The white rock under your feet is made of the compressed remains of billions of coccoliths, microscopic calcium carbonate platelets shed by single-celled marine algae that sank to the seafloor over millions of years of continuous biological production. And through that white-bottomed sea, those animals moved. There were also smaller, less dramatic mosasaurs that deserve mention precisely because they remind us that the famous giants were the exception, not the rule. Clydastes, one of the smaller-bodied forms, was perhaps 2 to 4 meters in length, a fast, agile swimmer with a long, flexible body, small, sharp teeth, and a distribution across much of the North American interior seaway. It was probably a schooling fish specialist, a quick-turning pursuit predator that could outmaneuver fast prey in ways that a 10-meter Tylosaurus could not. Ecologically, it may have filled a role somewhat analogous to modern dolphins or fast-swimming tuna. A mid-level predator in the size range large enough to be safe from most threats, but small enough to be agile. And then there were the smallest mosasaurs, genera like Caranodons from the latest Cretaceous of Europe and Africa. A small, perhaps 1-meter animal with spherical crushing teeth, a bottom dweller and shellfish specialist that would have been easy to overlook amid the giants, but was, in its own way, as perfectly adapted to its niche as anything in the Cretaceous Sea. The breadth of this ecological radiation, from 1-meter shellfish crushers to 14-meter open ocean giants, from specialized ammonite eaters to pursuit predators capable of killing plesiosaurs, is the real measure of the mosasaurs' success. They did not simply conquer the ocean. They divided it among themselves, specializing and diversifying until they had claimed something in nearly every habitat and every ecological role that the late Cretaceous ocean could offer. It took them perhaps 25 to 30 million years to achieve this. It would take less than a single day to end it. The chalk beds of western Kansas, the Niobrara Formation, are not particularly dramatic to look at. If you drive through western Kansas on a clear summer day, the landscape stretches out flat and yellow-brown to every horizon, interrupted by the occasional cottonwood along a dry creek bed, by grain elevators and water towers, by the long, straight lines of roads that ignore terrain because there is almost no terrain to ignore. It is, in the vocabulary of the American landscape, featureless. But beneath that featureless surface, at depths accessible by erosion along creek beds and road cuts, the chalk tells a different story. The Niobrara Formation represents roughly 5 million years of deposition in the western interior seaway. 5 million years of dying coccoliths and foraminifera sinking to the sea floor, of fish and mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and sharks dying and sinking in turn, of bones being buried in soft sediment before they could be scattered by current or decay. The preservation in the Niobrara is, by the standards of the fossil record, exceptional. Not because it was unusual for its time, but because the conditions were right. The water was shallow enough that oxygen-depleted bottom conditions helped slow decomposition. The sediment was fine-grained enough to preserve detail. And the geological history of Kansas has been gentle enough since the Cretaceous that these beds have not been deeply buried, metamorphosed, or significantly folded. The result is a treasure house. From the Niobrara Formation, paleontologists have recovered hundreds of mosasaur specimens, not fragments, but articulated skeletons, skulls with teeth in place, paddle bones still associated in their original positions, tail vertebrae still in sequence. They have recovered complete plesiosaur skeletons, including specimens with the bones of young inside them, evidence of live birth in plesiosaurs too. They have recovered the enormous bones of Archelon, the giant sea turtle. They have recovered thousands of shark teeth and the occasional complete shark skeleton in exceptional preservation. They have recovered fish of remarkable diversity and completeness. Complete xiphactinous skeletons, one of them famously with a complete 6-foot fish preserved inside its ribcage, a predator that swallowed too large a meal and died before it could digest it. They have also recovered the bones of the sky. In the air above the western interior seaway flew some of the largest flying animals ever to have lived on Earth.
The pterosaurs of the Cretaceous include forms of extraordinary size, and the skies above the Niobrara Sea were home to some of them. Pteranodon, not the largest pterosaur, but certainly the best known from this formation, had a wingspan of up to 7 meters, a long, toothless beak, and a striking backward projecting head crest that may have functioned in sexual display, in balance, or in both simultaneously.
Nyctosaurus, found in the same beds, had a crest that was even more extreme in proportion, a tall forked structure that rose above its head like an elaborate antenna. What these crests were for, beyond the broad consensus that they were involved in signaling and sexual selection, remains debated. The crests were structures of bone, sometimes expanded into thin plates or projecting extensions, and their exact aerodynamic or display function is still actively discussed. These pterosaurs would have been visible from the sea's surface. A diving pteranodon swooping low over the water to seize fish near the surface, as we infer from its anatomy, well suited to dip feeding, would have been visible to any large mosasaur cruising below. Did mosasaurs occasionally take diving pterosaurs? The question is not absurd. We have clear evidence that Tylosaurus ate diving birds, and a pterosaur touching the water surface was in a position not entirely unlike that of a diving bird.
We do not have direct fossil evidence of a mosasaur-pterosaur interaction, but the Niobrara Formation is still being worked, and the fossil record has a way of producing surprises. Farther north, in the chalk deposits of the Canadian provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, additional mosasaur specimens accumulate in the records of natural history museums, collected over more than a century by generations of paleontologists who drove dusty roads and scrambled down badland coulees and packed fossils in plaster jackets to carry out on horseback or truck, or sometimes on their own backs. In the collections of institutions from New Haven to London to Brussels to Leiden, the mosasaur material fills drawer after drawer. Teeth, vertebrae, paddle bones, skull fragments, the fragmentary remains of a dynasty. In Morocco, in the phosphate beds of the Oulad Abdoun Basin,
Mosasaur material of extraordinary quality and abundance has transformed our understanding of the group's diversity in the Southern Hemisphere. The Moroccan phosphates, deposited in the very latest Cretaceous and the earliest Paleocene, have yielded dozens of new species in recent decades. Mosasaurs of forms and sizes that were unknown from the Northern Hemisphere material, pushing the known diversity of the family higher with each new field season. The Moroccan material is especially valuable because it samples the very end of the Cretaceous, the last chapters of mosasaur evolution, and it shows a fauna that was, right up to the very end, still diverse, still ecologically complex, still occupying a wide range of niches. The mosasaurs did not decline gradually into extinction. They were, as far as we can tell from the fossil record, thriving. This is one of the things that makes what came next so extraordinary.
66 million years ago, on a day that was otherwise unremarkable by the standards of the Late Cretaceous, an asteroid approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter entered the Earth's atmosphere at roughly 20 kilometers per second and struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to roughly 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. It excavated a crater 180 kilometers across. It vaporized rock and water and anything living in the immediate region.
It generated a tsunami of incomprehensible scale. It sent debris into the upper atmosphere on trajectories that carried it around the world. And then it created conditions that would, over the following months and years, kill the majority of species on Earth. The mechanisms of the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event are still being refined. This is an area of active and sometimes contentious scientific research. But the broad outline is as follows.
The impact kicked enormous quantities of material into the stratosphere. Vaporized rock, sulfur from the evaporation of sulfate-rich sedimentary rocks, soot from the wildfires ignited by re-entering debris. This material formed a veil in the upper atmosphere that blocked sunlight, cooling the surface dramatically and shutting down photosynthesis globally within days to weeks. The resulting darkness lasted for months, possibly for years. In the absence of photosynthesis, the food webs that depended on it collapsed from the bottom up. The plankton in the ocean's surface waters died. The animals that ate them died. The animals that ate those animals died. The process cascaded upward through every level of every food web on the planet. For the mosasaurs, the mechanism of extinction was almost certainly indirect. A 14-meter mosasaur is too large to freeze to death from a temporary cooling event. But a 14-meter mosasaur needs to eat. And what it needed to eat other things. And at the bottom of that chain was the primary productivity of the ocean, the phytoplankton, the tiny photosynthetic organisms that convert sunlight and carbon dioxide into organic matter. When the light went out, the phytoplankton crashed. The food web collapsed from the foundation. The fish died. The ammonites died. The small mosasaurs that fed on fish and ammonites died. And without prey, the large mosasaurs had nothing to sustain them. The geological record is unambiguous on this point. At the KPG boundary, the thin layer of clay found globally in sedimentary sequences that marks the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, the mosasaurs simply disappear. Above the boundary, there are no mosasaur fossils, not diminished numbers, not a gradual decline, a boundary and silence. The same is true of the plesiosaurs, the ammonites, the marine crocodilians of the Cretaceous, the marine birds like Hesperornis that had evolved diving and swimming in those same seas. The whole upper tier of the Cretaceous ocean food web was swept away within a geologically instantaneous interval. We should be careful here about what instantaneous means in geological terms. The KPG boundary represents a period of time that, while brief by geological standards, may have extended over thousands of years in terms of the actual extinction process. Some researchers argue for a rapid, nearly instantaneous extinction, driven primarily by the immediate effects of the impact. Others argue for a more extended extinction interval, driven by the long-term ecological disruption, the years of darkness, the subsequent warming as the atmospheric debris cleared, the collapse of ocean productivity, the acidification of surface waters from the sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide released by the impact. The true picture is probably complex and involves both rapid initial killing and prolonged ecological collapse over subsequent years and decades. But in the fossil record, the result looks instantaneous because the timescales involved are too fine to resolve in sedimentary sequences. A few thousand years of extinction looks like a sharp line when compressed into a centimetre of rock. What is clear is that the mosasaurs, the animals that had evolved from a terrestrial lizard lineage, had returned to the sea, had diversified over 30 million years into the dominant predators of the global ocean, had survived numerous smaller extinction events during their tenure, had adapted to hunting in shallow seas and open ocean, and deep water and coastal reef environments, simply did not survive this one. The last Mosasaurus died. The last Tylosaurus died. The last Platycarpus, the last Prognathodon, the last Clydastes. In every ocean on Earth, the top predators of the Cretaceous Sea ceased to exist. The ammonites died too, the last of a lineage that had existed for 400 million years, that had survived the Permian extinction that killed 90% of all species, that had recovered from the end Triassic extinction that killed most of the early marine reptiles, that had diversified through every crisis and emerged more varied each time. The ammonites survived every mass extinction until the last one. They had no reason to expect this one would be different. The sharks survived. Of course the sharks survived. The sharks had been doing this, surviving impossible events, persisting through every mass extinction in the past 400 million years, for longer than any other group of jawed vertebrates. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction reduced shark diversity significantly, but the lineage persisted, and from that surviving diversity, the modern shark fauna eventually diversified. The sharks had outlasted the placoderms, outlasted the early fish radiations, outlasted the Permian extinction, outlasted the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, outlasted the plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs and the long reign of the mosasaurs. They would outlast the mosasaurs' replacements too, and whatever comes after those. There is a lesson in this, though it is a humbling one for anything with bones. The sea turtles survived, reduced, diminished, several lineages lost, but the group itself persisted. Leatherback sea turtles today are descended from Cretaceous turtles that somehow endured the extinction event. When you see a leatherback on a modern beach, you are seeing an animal whose lineage walked through the fire of the KPG boundary and came out the other side. The same is true of the crocodilians. The true crocodiles, gharials, and alligators of today are the descendants of animals that survived when the mosasaurs, with all their power and diversity, did not.
After the mosasaurs, the ocean was quiet in a way it had not been for 30 million years. The apex predators of the Cretaceous Sea were gone, and the ecological roles they had occupied were empty. This is not merely a metaphor. Ecology is in many ways a story of roles, of niches, functional positions in a food web that tend to be occupied by something, because the energy and the prey animals are available, and natural selection tends to produce animals capable of exploiting available resources. The niche of the large open ocean pursuit predator, the niche of the large shallow sea ambush predator, the niche of the crushing specialist that fed on hard-shelled prey. These niches existed in the post-KPG ocean just as surely as they had in the Cretaceous, because the conditions that made them possible had not fundamentally changed. What filled them? The answer took time.
The immediate aftermath of the KPG extinction was an ocean of impoverished food webs, diminished primary productivity, reduced diversity at every level, a marine ecosystem that was, by any measure, a pale shadow of the Cretaceous ocean that had preceded it. This interval lasted for millions of years. In the earliest Paleocene, the ocean recovered slowly, unevenly, with some groups diversifying rapidly into vacant niches and others taking far longer to re-establish themselves. The sharks were first. Their relatively rapid recovery, rapid being a term applied loosely to processes taking hundreds of thousands of years, established them as the dominant large predators in the post-extinction ocean in ways they had never quite been during the Mesozoic. During the age of the mosasaurs, sharks had been important but had coexisted with and been overshadowed by the mosasaurs themselves.
After the extinction, with the mosasaurs gone, the sharks moved into the open ecological space and diversified accordingly. And then, about 55 to 50 million years ago, the first mammals arrived in the sea. The ancestors of the whales, four-legged, deer-sized terrestrial herbivores, members of the group called the artiodactyls, that also gave rise to hippos, pigs, and cattle, began a gradual transition to aquatic life, probably initially in river and estuary environments, before spreading into coastal seas and, eventually, the open ocean. The story of whale evolution is, in many ways, a direct echo of the mosasaur story, a terrestrial mammal lineage returning to the water, losing its legs, developing paddle-like limbs, evolving streamlined bodies and powerful tails, becoming the dominant large predators of the global ocean. The parallel is almost too neat to be coincidence, and it isn't coincidence. It is a demonstration of the power of ecological opportunity.
The same set of open niches, the same productive ocean, the same basic physics of swimming and prey capture. Different animals, same solutions. The mosasaurs and the whales never met. Between the extinction of the last mosasaur and the first appearance of a clearly aquatic whale ancestor, roughly 15 million years passed. The ocean that the early whales entered was already quite different from the ocean the mosasaurs had known. Cooler in places, with different continental configurations, without the vast epicontinental seas that had been so important to mosasaur ecology. But in the broad strokes, the same world, a global ocean, productive, warm in the tropics, cold at the poles, full of fish and squid and the opportunity for a large, intelligent, air-breathing predator to make a very good living. We live in the whale's ocean now.
The great sperm whale that descends to depths of more than 2 kilometers, holding its breath for over an hour, hunting giant squid in total darkness. That is what the Cretaceous ecological niche of the deep-diving mosasaur has been refilled with in the fullness of time. The orca, with its intelligence, its social structure, its ability to hunt prey as large as baleen whales. That is what has replaced the top-tier pursuit predator of the Cretaceous Sea. They are not the same animals. They are not even the same class of vertebrates. but they are occupying the same positions in the same food web, playing the same ecological roles, solving the same evolutionary problems, and producing similar solutions, because the problems are the same. The mosasaurs are gone, but the sea they built their lives in is, in its deepest structure, still here.
There is chalk in the cliffs of southern England that was laid down in the Niobrara Sea. Not the same chalk. The English chalk was deposited in the Tethys Sea and the shallow northern European epicontinental sea, while the Kansas chalk was deposited in the western interior seaway. But chalk of the same age, the same biological origin, and very nearly the same story. The white cliffs of Dover, which you can see from the French coast on a clear day, are made of late Cretaceous chalk. So are the white cliffs on the French side of the Channel. So are the chalk hills of the South Downs in England, the chalk downs of Normandy, the chalk beds of Denmark and southern Sweden and the Low Countries. All of this white rock, hundreds of meters thick in places, exposed in cliffs and quarries and road cuts across a swathe of northwestern Europe, was once the floor of a shallow, warm, mosasaur-inhabited sea. The fossils are still coming out of it.
English chalk pits have yielded mosasaur material for more than 2 centuries. The first mosasaur fossil recognized as such in English literature was described in the early 19th century, and English chalk has continued to produce teeth, vertebrae, and occasional partial skulls. The chalk of Belgium and the Netherlands, the Maastrichtian chalk, named for the town of Maastricht where the type specimen of Mosasaurus was found, has been yielding mosasaur material since the 18th century and continues to do so, with new and significant specimens still emerging from commercial quarrying operations and systematic excavation. This is a remarkable fact about deep time. The evidence does not belong only to the past. It is physically present, distributed through the rock under our feet, accessible to anyone with the knowledge to find it and the patience to look.
A paleontologist working in a chalk quarry in Belgium is not metaphorically reaching into the past. They are physically touching the floor of the Cretaceous Sea. The bones they find have been sealed in that chalk for 66 million years, unchanged in their fundamental chemistry, waiting in the rock while the continents moved and the climates swung, and the dinosaurs ended, and the mammals rose, and the first humans walked, and then all of human history transpired above them in its entirety. 66 million years is a number that resists intuition. Let us try a comparison. If you compressed the entire history of complex animal life on Earth, roughly 541 million years from the Cambrian explosion to today, into a single calendar year beginning on January 1st, the KPG extinction would fall on approximately December 14th. The mosasaurs would rule from roughly November 20th to December 14th, a reign of about 3.5 weeks in our compressed calendar.
Modern humans would appear at about 11:54 p.m. on December 31st. All of recorded human history, every civilization, every empire, every war, every achievement from the first writing to the present moment, would occupy the last 37 seconds of that year. In those 37 seconds, we have managed to become the dominant force shaping the planet. The mosasaurs had 25 days. There is no moral to this comparison, except perhaps that duration is not the measure of significance. The mosasaurs did not fail because they ran out of time. They were,
at the moment of their extinction, as successful as any animal lineage in the history of the planet. They occupied every level of the marine food web on a global scale. They had solved, repeatedly and elegantly, the evolutionary challenges that the Cretaceous ocean presented. If not for an event that no amount of biological fitness could have prepared them for. A 10-kilometer rock arriving from space at 20 kilometers per second, they might have continued for another 30 million years, or 50, or 100. We cannot know. We can only know that the universe is indifferent to biological success, and that the most perfectly adapted predator in the history of the ocean can be erased in a geological instant by something entirely external to the biosphere. If you visit the eastern seaboard of the United States in late spring or early summer, if you walk a beach in Delaware or New Jersey or Maryland, you may encounter horseshoe crabs. They come ashore at high tide to lay their eggs, the females dragging behind them the smaller males that have clasped onto their shells, and they move across the sand with a purposeful, armor-plated slowness that seems indifferent to the presence of humans. They are extraordinary animals, and they are extremely old. The horseshoe crab lineage has existed in something close to its current form for approximately 450 million years. It has survived every mass extinction since the Ordovician extinction that killed 85% of all species, the Devonian extinction, the Permian extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, and the KPG extinction that killed the mosasaurs. The horseshoe crab was on the beach when the asteroid hit. It was on the beach before the mosasaurs existed. It is on the beach now. If you find a mosasaur's direct living relatives, you must look differently. The mosasaurs belong to the varanoid lineage, and the varanoid lineage is still very much with us. The monitor lizards, the Varanus genus and its relatives, are the closest living relatives of the mosasaurs, the group from which the mosasaur lineage diverged. A Komodo dragon, the largest living lizard at up to 3 meters and 100 kilograms, is not a mosasaur. It is not even particularly close to a mosasaur in any direct lineage sense. The Komodo dragon is descended from the terrestrial varanoid lineage that never went back to the sea, while the mosasaurs represent a side branch that did. But looking at a Komodo dragon, its elongated skull, its forked tongue flickering to taste the air, its loose-jointed jaw capable of swallowing remarkably large prey, its alert and apparently calculating gaze, you are looking at something that shares a body plan and a general design philosophy with the animals that ruled the Cretaceous Sea. The family resemblance is real, written in the bones. There is also this. The snakes, those extraordinary limbless reptiles that have colonized environments from tropical rainforest to arid desert to open ocean to freshwater river, are themselves thought by most researchers to be closely related to the varanoid lineage, either as a sister group or as derived varanoids that lost their legs in adaptation to a burrowing or shallow water lifestyle. If this is correct, then every time you see a sea snake, those elegant, paddle-tailed reptiles that hunt fish in tropical coral reefs, you are seeing something that shares a deep ancestor with the mosasaurs, a lineage that also returned to the sea, that also evolved a paddle-shaped tail for swimming, that also found its living in the ocean.
The sea snakes did not evolve from mosasaurs, but they traveled a parallel road from the same starting point and arrived at a similar destination. The Komodo dragon stalking deer through Indonesian forest, the monitor lizard foraging along an African riverbank, the sea snake coiling through a coral reef. All of them carry the signature of an ancient lineage that also produced, in one extraordinary evolutionary experiment, the largest marine lizards the world has ever seen. They are the living relics of that lineage's potential, the survivors of the branch that stayed on land while their cousins wrote their extraordinary story in the chalk and limestone of a drowned continent.
The ocean does not mark the passage of its dead. There are no monuments in the Western Interior Seaway because the Western Interior Seaway no longer exists. The water drained as the sea level fell in the earliest Paleocene, leaving behind a flat expanse of marine sediments that became, over millions of years of erosion and weathering and tectonic uplift, the Great Plains of North America. The chalk that was the floor of that sea is now, in places, the rolling prairie above which hawks circle and wheat grows and cattle graze. The mosasaurs that hunted through its water are rock now, waiting to be found. The chalk seas of Europe followed their own history after the extinction. The European epicontinental sea retreated as the climate cooled in the early Paleogene, the shallow basins draining, the chalk beds being buried under subsequent sediments, then uplifted, eroded, and eventually re-exposed in the cliffs and quarries where paleontologists find them today. The Tethys Sea narrowed and eventually mostly closed as Africa pushed into Europe, its final remnant, now the Mediterranean, a small, landlocked sea that bears almost no resemblance to the vast equatorial ocean whose waters once hosted mosasaurs on a global scale. If you swim in the Mediterranean today, you are swimming in a ghost. The water is new. The basin has been repeatedly flooded and dried since the Cretaceous, but the rock on the seafloor and on the shores is, in places, ancient chalk, and that chalk was once the floor of a mosasaur sea. We discovered mosasaurs in the Age of the Enlightenment, that period in the late 18th century when Europeans were beginning for the first time to think systematically about the natural world, to collect and classify and ask what things were and where they came from. The Maastricht specimen was found before Darwin, before the theory of evolution, before any scientific framework existed for making sense of an animal that was clearly not alive, but also clearly not any known living creature. The scientists who first examined it knew it was something extraordinary. They did not know what. It took generations to understand. Now we know. We know that the mosasaurs were lizards that went to sea. We know they evolved from terrestrial ancestors and returned to the ocean and diversified into the dominant predators of a global marine ecosystem. We know they lived for 30 million years, from roughly 98 to 66 million years ago, and that they ended in the same geological moment that ended the non-avian dinosaurs and the ammonites and the plesiosaurs and the flying pterosaurs. We know their closest living relatives are the monitor lizards, and we know that the snakes may be their evolutionary cousins. We know their bones lie in chalk and limestone and phosphate on every continent, including Antarctica. We know that the world they inhabited, the warm, shallow,
sunlit Cretaceous sea is gone, and that its waters are now land, its creatures are now stone, and its ecology is now only recoverable through the painstaking accumulation of fossil evidence and the increasingly sophisticated analytical tools that scientists bring to bear on that evidence. What we do not know is still the larger part. We do not know their color. We do not know the precise duration of their breath-hold dives. We do not know the details of their social structure, whether they were solitary, whether they aggregated in feeding areas, whether mothers cared for young after birth. We do not know their vocalizations, if they had any.
We do not know the fine details of their hunting strategies, the actual behavior of a Tylosaurus in pursuit of prey, the way a prognathodon approached an ammonite colony on the seafloor. We do not know what it felt like to stand on the shore of the Western Interior Seaway 80 million years ago and watch something very large break the surface and dive again. No creature alive today has stood on that shore. No creature alive today ever will. But we have the bones, and in the bones, if we read them carefully enough, we have the outline of a story. We have 30 million years of evolutionary innovation compressed into the anatomy of animals long dead. We have the feeding specializations written in tooth shape and jaw architecture. We have the locomotor adaptations written in flipper proportions and tail vertebrae. We have the growth rates written in bone microstructure. We have the body temperatures written in isotopic chemistry. We have the habitat preferences written in the sedimentary matrix in which they were found. We have, in short, enough to understand the shape of what was here. There was a sea, and in it lived things of extraordinary variety and power. Things that had taken the Varanoid body plan and run it through 30 million years of selection for open ocean living, until it had produced animals that weighed several tons and moved through the water with the efficiency of sharks and the intelligence of large lizards. These animals had never seen land. They had never needed to. The sea was sufficient for everything, for hunting and for hiding, for birth and for growth, for the full expression of everything that natural selection had spent 30 million years building into them. And then the light went out, and the sea went quiet, and the chalk fell on the bones. And 66 million years later, someone found them, and began to ask what they were, and kept asking, and has not stopped asking yet.
The Earth built the mosasaurs the way it builds everything, slowly, indifferently, without intention, through the accumulated pressure of selection acting on variation across incomprehensible spans of time. It did not build them for us to find. It did not build them for anything. It built them because the warm, shallow sea was there, and the food was there, and the opportunities were there, and the ancestral Varanoid lineage happened to be in a position to take advantage of those opportunities. And the ones that did were the ones that left descendants, and the descendants did the same, and so on for 30 million years, until the sea was full of them, until they had taken on every shape the sea could demand and filled every role the sea could offer. They are gone now, those animals. The sea that made them is gone. The world that held that sea is gone. What remains is the chalk,
white and quiet, full of bones that have been waiting in the dark for 66 million years. The chalk does not know we are looking, but we are looking. And sometimes, in the looking, we find something that almost answers back.